Hello, Global Theater. My name is Gerry Fialka. Today's November 7, 2025. Want to thank Rob Grant, his amazing podcast. I'm probably wrong about everything. Please subscribe. Want to welcome today's guest, Thomas Little. Where are you calling from, Thomas?
Rochester, New York.
How cool is that? First question is, what is the best thing for a human being?
Honesty.
Wow, I never get that. That is a great word and a great start. What's your favorite form of information, how it comes into you?
Form of information. For someone who does education on YouTube, I think people would expect me to say YouTube, but it's not. That's not really one of the things. I mean, books have to be.
Yeah.
I mean, look at the library.
Well, look at what's behind you. I was now. Did you become a reader? One, because your parents told you to. Two, they did as an example, or three on your own.
I don't remember a time when I wasn't reading. I mean, because I credit my mom with that, because my mom, I don't remember this obviously, but I've seen old, VHS tapes of me, a tiny little kid, where she would be reading things out to me. And it wasn't just like, oh, I'm going to read Thomas a bedtime story or whatnot. It was always the book was in front of me. I could see the words, and she was like pointing them out and sounding things out. And so I don't remember like learning to read at all. It's always been something that I've enjoyed and I've pursued.
Why do you think humans collect or gather information?
Humans have a unique capacity for trying to understand the world.
Yeah.
Now, like, you can't get in the mind of a different creature, but we have a habit of finding patterns in everything, even where patterns don't actually exist, right? We find shapes in clouds, we find conspiracy theories, we find Jesus on toast, right? And some of these things are real patterns that we can find and we can understand, and that's the source of knowledge is pattern recognition.
Really, two great words. I appreciate you saying those. And do you think this need or want to collect information is more innate or more invented?
I think it's absolutely innate.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm not an anthropologist, but one would. I do know that there are less contacted or relatively uncontacted tribes and far-flung regions of the Pacific or deep in the Amazonian rainforest, and their language some of their languages are like in some ways more advanced or more unique than the languages that we're more familiar with in the more like the known world necessarily. So you have to think that there is some level of innate need to categorize and organize and understand. How that manifests is probably somewhat dependent on culture.
Do thoughts create emotions?
I think they can. Certainly if you're an actor and you have to cry, you have to think about something that makes you sad, and therefore you become sad. Or you can think about something that makes you angry and you become angry. You can think about something that makes you excited and it makes you excited. I don't think it's one way or the other, but they're certainly intertwined.
Yeah, some of these early questions, is it more this or more that? I know it's both and it depends, but they're just prompts. You don't have to answer the question. It's just to get you to talk. This is the next one, Thomas. I don't know what I think until I fill in the blank.
Often I don't know what I really think until I have to teach it to someone else.
To teach it? That's amazing. I don't get that answer. Yeah, to teach it to someone else. McLuhan says, I don't know what I think until I say it. Joan Didion says, I don't know what I think until I write it. Can humans think without language?
I mean, I certainly can't. I don't want to speak too broadly about things, but I'm of. I know linguists are not particularly fond of the strong Sapir-Whorf hypothesis, which is that our language informs the ways in which we can think. But I think that is there. I think there is something to at least a broad interpretation of that.
Yeah.
Um, Certainly, I can't imagine thinking in anything but some form of language, right? Music being a type of language sometimes.
Very good. We're going to get into music, but Chomsky says language is not just words. It's a culture, a tradition, a unification of community, a whole history that creates what a community is. Thomas, what do you do when language doesn't work? When language breaks down, what do you do?
I don't want to seem too trite and say, well, where words fail, there is music. But I also think there's something to the idea that music, especially instrumental music, has a powerful role in speaking directly to emotions in a way that bypasses words. But
Yeah.
I still think of music as a kind of language. There is a grammatical structure to it that gives it coherence. So in the broad sense, I think it is still a language. And if you can't count that, then when words fail, right, what happens? Probably violence. People go to war when diplomacy breaks down. So
Well, that's funny because there is a cliche I love to say, if you can't say it, sing it. If you can't sing it, dance it. So, yeah, I mean, you could keep going on and on. If you can't dance it, teach it. Okay, Thomas, your observations of humans in general. Are we more thinking beings or more feeling beings?
when I'm optimistic, I think thinking. But it's hard to look at the world, excuse me, and look at conflicts in the world and think that we're not feeling. Because if you try to approach conflicts between people or the attempts to try to fix big global problems that need multi-governmental solutions, feelings tend to dominate. When we think we're at our best, but I think it's mostly feeling.
Yeah, Bridget Bardot says, when I make love, I don't think. I'm like, good luck. How do you turn your brain off? And people meditate, go, think about not thinking. And there's a bumper sticker on a car in my street. It says, don't believe everything you think. And I'm like, well, you could say, don't believe everything you feel.
Well, in that case, thinking and feeling would be synonymous functionally.
Yeah.
It's good to. One of the problems is that I don't remember where this is from, but the idea that the first thought that goes through your head is your instinct, the second thought that goes through your head is you actually thinking. So you can't.
Instinct is first. Yeah, that's the Ginsburg says first thought, best thought. Instinct is the first, and the second is actually thinking. Yeah. I would love to find the origin of that. Let me know if you remember. Okay, so very good, Thomas. These are two questions from Alan Turing in the 50s. One, is thinking a function of the soul?
I'd be curious to what he meant by soul. Typically, when people say soul, they're thinking more theologically, right? Because the idea that the soul is as some metaphysical part of ourselves that exists in some way independent of our physical bodies. I mean, if the soul is who you are on the most basic sense, then I think therefore I am Rene Descartes. It would have to be like our ability to think is what makes us human.
Yeah.
So yeah. I mean, it would have to be.
Good. Second Turing question, can machines think?
No.
Do you more pursue happiness or more pursue meaning?
I don't see a distinction between the two.
Well, the way I got the question, it might flesh it out a little. Viktor Frankl's book, Man's Search for Meaning, he says happiness doesn't tend to last, meaning tends to last.
Well, then I guess I would say meaning, but I get a lot of I get a lot of personal fulfillment out of doing something that I feel is meaningful, adding something meaningful to the world, be it creatively or educationally, and that um, I feel like I derive a lot of what I define as happiness from those pursuits.
Yeah.
Versus like, I don't know, eating a candy bar or something like something that's I understand what you're saying, that there's some things that are more
Yeah.
like in the moment, but those things aren't as I don't have a big sweet tooth. This is like those things aren't as important to me.
Yeah. What's faster, speed of light or speed of thought?
Light. I mean, objectively, it has to be light.
Audre Lorde, the poet, said, you can't dismantle the master's house using the master's tools. Her colleague said, oh, you can if you expose the tools. What new tool do you suggest? And it doesn't have to be tangible.
For the purposes of dismantling something?
Well, that's a good question. I open some of these questions with cute quotes. It doesn't mean you have to apply it. I'm basically asking you, what tool do you most gravitate towards? And it doesn't have to be new, but you can apply the quote if you want.
In my own creative work, I tend to think of like musical analysis tools from contemporary music theory as something that composers can and should use to create meaningful pieces of music. Pierre Boulez, who was, a very polemic thinker, especially in his early years, and a polemic writer, conductor, composer, very, very modernist. He came up with the idea that it's somewhat, I think, tangentially related to critical theory, which is that the analysis that you do should be geared towards doing something creative with those tools. And that's something that I've taken and run with, because like I've said, I think of music as it's a language on some level. It's a language that has to have a grammar, and if you're going to figure out what grammar you're using, if you come up with something that sounds interesting to you, you have to analyze it in order to understand what you're doing. And then once you've analyzed it, once you understand this is how this snippet of music works, you can write a whole piece based on that snippet, but you have to understand what you're doing.
Yeah. We're going to get deep into that. You're really bringing up some important stuff. But a couple more of these. What toy do you gravitate towards? So I ask people about their tool, and then one guy says, hey, what about a toy? So I ask people now, what's a toy you gravitate towards?
I've always been a big fan of Legos. I think that that's a cute answer. It's more a literal answer. But I think there's something to the idea that here are these little bits and bobs that are the same, right? You can, if you have a small set of Lego pieces, the number of ways you can put them together, I mean, statistically, it's almost infinite. You could spend an entire lifetime finding new combinations of just a very small selection of these elements. And, music, the other thing that I talk about a lot with my private students, especially composition students, is that you're building a toolbox.
Yeah.
So like how it's not really the tools, right? The 1960s through, maybe the 1980s, with the advent of spectral analysis, that really gave us the basic set of tools. Like that rounded out the set of tools that composers have, right? The avant-garde did its job in giving us all these different tools and experimenting with them. And now there's a whole lot of fertile ground on these little, it's almost like they discovered all these islands, and now we're coming through and saying, well, yeah, Cage did that, or Boulez thought about this, or Stockhausen thought about that. But there's a whole universe to be discovered, and just exploring these islands that they kind of visited and charted out. And I think that's the same thing with putting together Legos in different ways, because if you have a small set of compositional tools, the ways in which you put those things together to create a piece is going to be different, even if you're using just a small set of them.
Love it, Thomas. It reminds me of Satie made a little note on one of his scores. Play like a nightingale with a toothache.
One of my favorites. No one knows what it means, and no one ever will.
No, but we know what a nightingale is. We know what a toothache is, and we can imagine. So he's really stretching. I mean, there's there's many composers that go off on the traditional grammar, and that's important, like you mentioned. Okay, so, and we're going to get into music soon. A few more. What do you worry about when you go to bed at night?
Usually different aspects of the future.
Yeah.
It's what deadlines are coming up at this point. Like, as someone who loves academia, am I going to get an academic job? When what's the next? How can I best put myself out there for job applications and things like that? There's always a certain baseline level of uncertainty that we live with that makes us human, but it's also that's a general source of like, well, what's going to happen? What's tomorrow necessarily going to bring, or what's the next month of next year going to bring?
Yep. McLuhan learned from a poet that artists are the antenna of the race. Musicians, sculptors, they're broadcasting and detecting the hidden psychic effects of our inventions. So we might learn how to cope with what we don't like about our inventions. So I asked you the question McLuhan probed his whole career. Why do we ignore the hidden psychic effects of our inventions, even though the artists are broadcasting them to us?
Follow the money.
Very good.
Yeah, culture is defined by who has power, and who has power is defined by who can accrue the most capital, and capital is defined by monetary units. It's
Yeah.
The question of like funding of the arts is always, that's been a perennial question, because to many people it's not an obvious thing to invest in. And so sometimes people don't care about it. And consequently, they don't take artists seriously, because they don't think the artists are saying anything useful to society, because they're not necessarily in the corporate world.
Yeah. Do artists have moral obligation?
I think today they do. Today they do.
Yeah.
And that's just because, and this is something that I wish I had so many good citations off the top of my head for this, but it's something I read recently, which was a critique of modern society from the point of being so consumer based. Everything has gone to, there's lack of physical media these days. Everything's, you subscribe to a streaming service, you subscribe to listen to your books or read your books on an iPad. There are, television is there are just a bunch of different streaming services. And so you own less and less. And if you own less and less, your morality as a person can often be judged by what do you consume.
Yeah.
Right. And that just, it's like, well, this is why people care so much about ethical consumption, or like, oh, I don't watch that TV show anymore because one of the artists was, one of the actors was accused of whatever. And so I think if you're going to be an artist in this society, you have to act as morally upstanding as you can possibly be. Not that it wasn't important in previous eras, but I think because we're living in this era where there's less and less physical ownership of things. Your ability to be an artist is dependent on your ability to get eyeballs on your thing. And if you're not acting in a way that's consistent with how people expect you to behave morally, you can kind of be up the creek, right? There are counter examples where people are intentionally being provocative or whatnot. But I do think that we're starting to see more emphasis on ethical consumption on the consumer level that's going to be pushing artists to be more ethical in their production.
Are you more afraid of new ideas or more afraid of old ideas?
I'm afraid of old ideas that people think are new.
Yeah, I
That's
get that a lot. It's good. Can you conjure up your earliest memory ever, or one of them?
um vaguely I was at a zoo at one point. I don't really like zoos, so maybe that's why it's stuck in my head.
Is memory more a curse or more a blessing?
It's a blessing.
Yeah. Tell me someone within your immediate family who had an impact on you, and what specifically was that impact?
I mean, I've already talked about my mom reading to me. I think that was very, very, very important to me and where I am right now. My dad has a extraordinarily wild and wacky sense of humor that has. I'm not nearly as kind of openly fun in a lot of my public facing stuff as he is, but uh, that levity and that willingness to not take yourself super seriously has been, I know, very, very important for him and very important for me as well.
Really good.
Yeah.
I appreciate you being articulate and concise, Thomas. Tell me someone outside your immediate family who had an impact on you, and what was that impact?
Outside. I'll go with my longtime piano professor, George Kiorpis. He was not my first professor. Um, my parents were, I'm an only child, so my parents were always interested in putting me into, um, uh, you know, give me social activities and whatnot, or sign me up for things. And I was taking lessons from the wife of one of Dr. Yorpis's grad students. He was a longtime professor at University of North Carolina, Greensboro, big Chopin interpreter. He passed away several years ago. And I mean, it was this, his grad student took me in and I said, well, you got to hear this kid play. And I was like transposing stuff like chord progressions. And I was like, I didn't really know what I didn't know why this was so important or so like, oh, it was so amazing to people. But the relationship that I had with Dr. K, as I called him, was from, gosh, I was probably what, 9, maybe I don't remember exactly when, and I stayed with him all the way through high school, and he was always very supportive of helping me early on when I was studying composition, but also teaching me pieces that I brought in that weren't necessarily his cup of tea, but he recognized that I had a delight in 20th century music that he didn't share, but was willing to help me learn it, and that was
beautiful.
You know,
did your parents raise you a particular religion?
We church shopped a lot when I was a kid. I was baptized in a Methodist church, but we eventually settled on a Lutheran church that was too small to have internal church politics, which was good, and that also got me started on being a church musician. Yeah. So one of the other folks I can mention there is the organist at that church at the time. Her name was Donna Wilson, and she was another student of Dr. K at one point when she was in a graduate program at UNCG, and she was the first person to like really get me to play church music in public, which I had extreme performance anxiety at that point, and it's something I've done off and on, but more on since being a church musician.
Thomas, do you pray?
Not as much as I should, but yeah, I do.
If God exists, what would you like God to say to you after you die?
Oh, the hope of any Christian is to hear, well done, good and faithful servant.
Yeah.
It's hard to think that if one believes that if one is totally like, oh, I'm saved or whatnot, I think that's hubris. So I think anyone who wants to do good should be, at some level kind of concerned that they're not doing enough. They're not, or not following Christ's teaching to the extent that they should, if they profess belief. And that can be hard sometimes. A lot of the times.
Do evil people exist, or does evil use people as a vehicle?
I think this is something my wife has wrestled with more than me. She has because she has her MDiv. That's more. She actually has a degree in this stuff. I think there are people who are inclined to evil. I think there are those who are wired in such a way that they delight in cruelty and exploitation of others. I don't believe that those people are beyond redemption, but I think there is something different about the great villains of history, just the way that they're wired, because I think most people couldn't even imagine doing or committing the atrocities that that small handful of folks have committed.
Yeah, because the follow-up is, how do you advise someone to deal with an enemy? And I'll set it up. Alan Watts says, if you acknowledge your enemy, you empower them. Coppola stole from the mob and the samurai. Keep your friends close and your enemies closer. JFK said, forgive your enemy, but don't forget their name. And Fellini says, I need an enemy. So it's a lot of thoughts-based question is, how do you advise someone to deal with an enemy? But first, how would you respond to Alan Watts? If you acknowledge your enemy, you empower them.
I don't think that's true.
Yeah.
And I think oddly enough, and I'm not even really a Harry Potter fan, but in the Harry Potter series, they don't speak the name of the big villain Voldemort. It's like, oh, he who must not be. And that the not naming of someone, they're not willing to acknowledge the existence of someone, gives that person power. The people who exist on the fringes, the people who exist as purveyors of things that are considered taboo in society, people are interested in that. People are interested in uncovering information that they don't know. And so sunlight is the best disinfectant for that. As far as enemies go, most of the time, ignorant, just if they're not actively trying to harm you, if they're just being annoying, you can just ignore them. And they typically go away, and it irritates. I think of like internet like I come across internet trolls. Right? People are just like being mean for no particular reason. And just don't acknowledge or don't engage. It's because that's what they want.
Well, Nassim Taleb said games were created to give non-heroes the illusion of winning. In real life, we don't know who wins or loses, but we can tell who a hero is. Gregory Bates, an anthropologist, says if the criminal gets caught, does he go, whoa, my criminal skills weren't up to snuff that day? Or does he go, oh, I did something morally and socially wrong? Basic question is, does punishment work?
I think the evidence points to largely no.
Yeah.
The recidivism rate in the United States is absurd, considering that we have a very high incarceration rate as well.
Yeah.
The stigma of being incarcerated continues on for most people well after they've been punished by the state. In contrast to other places where there is an actual emphasis on rehabilitation, an actual emphasis on criminality as a kind of public health concern, or addiction as a public health concern for that matter, those places are a lot, by all the available metrics, a much nicer place to be, because they don't just throw people back and punish them continuously for being stuck in some kind of cycle, right? The fact that if someone gets out of prison in the US, oftentimes they can never vote again. They have a hard time getting any sort of job, right? They're not trained in anything, they're not educated in anything. And so like, what do you expect? They just go back into the system. And so, no, I think I think you do need some kind of system. Like the people who want to completely get rid of the prison system. I'm just using prison as an example here of state punishment. The people who want to get rid of that, I think, are kind of off their rocker, right? Because you have to have some way of policing society in a way that makes society livable. But how you treat people when they're locked up, seems to make all the difference, and we just don't do a good job of that here.
There you go. Well done, man. You're a smart person. I appreciate this. James Joyce was the first projectionist in Dublin 100 years ago. Basically checked out. He said, "This is stupid. Why should I go inside a building and see a movie of a tree when I go outside and see a real tree?" Years later, Faulkner said, "Sometimes the best fiction is more true than journalism. Why do we have to recreate things in order to get them? Why do we have to go to a theatrical play of people acting out life? Why don't we just live life?"
That reminds me of a quote from the TV show Parks and Recreation, where the hardcore libertarian Ron Swanson is made to introduce a modern art show. And he goes, I don't know why you have to look at a picture of a tree when you can go outside in nature and stand in it. Which is similar.
Exactly.
It seems very similar.
Choice. Yeah, but perfect.
Yeah. Well, art imitates life. Like, the best art is not just a representation, but it is a distillation. Even a documentary, which is capturing some part of life, you're going to get that footage over a series of days, weeks, months, years, or whatnot. And sometimes it's just the impressiveness of recreating something that you can see using a completely different medium, right? Someone who is able to carve a sculpture using a chainsaw. Some of this just like, wow, the existence of this thing, even though it looks like something outside, the existence of a thing is impressive in and of itself, because you know the medium through which it was created, the tools that were used to create that thing. So that's part of it. But I mean, for someone like Joyce, I mean, Ulysses is a very stylized book about a day in the life. Yeah. It's about how you tell the story more so than just that there is a story. The plot of Ulysses is not actually the most important part of Ulysses. It's the language. It's the way it's structured.
Really well done. Beautiful. So walk us through, Thomas, your tipping point to pursue music as your calling. You're growing up reading. You got books all behind you. You talked about how reading books is important. Where was that? I mean, imagine your parents are playing music around the house live or just on some format. And then did they take you to live shows and go, "That's what I want to be"? Did you study music in high school and college? Where's your tipping point? That's my calling.
Well, it wasn't through my parents necessarily. They were supportive. My dad is one of the more tone deaf people you'd ever hope to meet. I mean, he took piano lessons for 3 years. Still can't find middle C. I got into it. I touched upon this a little bit earlier, but I got into it just because my parents were willing to expose me to a bunch of different things. And the tipping point for composition was my discovery of 20th century music on YouTube, of all places, when I was maybe like late tweens, early teens. At that point, I was having a bit of a crisis, if you will, of, I enjoyed music. I enjoyed improvising at the piano. I enjoyed a lot of those things, but I didn't like playing Mozart. I didn't like playing Haydn. Didn't like playing Beethoven. I liked playing, or Chopin, whatever Dr. K would assign, because that was his world. That was his tradition. That was what he really enjoyed. But I enjoyed the few times where he would assign some kind of 20th century piece. Mostly this would be works by his one-time counterpoint professor at Peabody, Henry Cowell, who was one of the greats of 20th century music, and from whom he told me he didn't learn a thing about counterpoint, the counterpoint class. But through YouTube, I found score videos. This is early on the days of people syncing up systems of music to recordings as a way to showcase them to the world. And I discovered Charles Ives' Concord Sonata. And since then, Ives has been my favorite composer for a host of other reasons. But when I heard the third movement of that piece, it was like, I didn't know music could be that beautiful. I didn't realize music could be that powerful, and I knew it was going to be the most difficult thing that I ever could that I could have learned, right? Even though it's the easiest movement of that sonata, that I found the sheet music and I took it in. I was like, I want to learn this.
Yeah.
And I was dedicated to practicing that piece
Wow.
in a way that, and I think that's why Dr. K put up with it, because like, well, okay, he's finally practicing. He's finally doing it, because I think that my enthusiasm for that, and then eventually doing a composition intensive at the place where I eventually did my undergrad at the University of North Carolina School of the Arts in Winston-Salem, which is not too far from UNCG. That solidified my desire to expand my appreciation and love for 20th century music into writing 21st century music.
Beautiful. A screenwriting teacher told me great art is when you can clearly see the intention of the maker. Kubrick says the opposite. Great art is when you can clearly not see the intention of the maker. What role does intention play in your creative process? When you're writing an original Thomas piece, it's not a commission or a contest or anything. You just write, you're composing an original Thomas piece. What role does intention play?
Well, first I have to find it very funny that Stanley Kubrick, of all people, of all filmmakers, would say that. His style is unmistakable.
I take these things out of context, but there's ambiguity in his films. I mean, come on, that's what he's talking about. Ambiguity,
the meaning as opposed to the style, because the style of Kubrick is it's so obvious as to be the source of many parodies. When people ask me about what I do in my music, I always find answering that to be difficult, because I do try to do something a little bit different in every piece. Analysis of small bits of material that I write is a technique and a starting point, but if I find that I'm writing the same piece again, I'll stop and I'll start over and try to do something else, because to me the point of composition is to bring something into the world that you want to hear that you haven't found anywhere else. Like you have to want to bring that in. And so intention, I mean, music is so abstract that even if you have intentions and plans and pre-compositional ideas, you play that piece for somebody else and they listen to it and they tell you what they think about it, they're going to have a totally different interpretation. The piece to them is as different as the piece is to you. Yeah. So that's interesting. That's just a very interesting question to consider. And I guess my answer is, I question just how relevant it is to the listener, because intent in a film is going to be more readily obvious. It's going to be there's by the nature of the thing itself. Whereas a piece of abstract music, like, if there's a quote of, a hymn tune here, there's a distortion of this thing over there. What's the meaning of this instrument versus that instrument? Sometimes it's just like, I thought it sounded cool to have a bass clarinet there, right? And sometimes it's here are these abstract pitch structures, and I'm trying to move through this and whatnot. But there is a wide discrepancy, especially when you look at 20th century music, between the intention of a composer to do something interesting, and then when you play it, it's like, well, this just sounds like whatever,
Well, that's Igor Stravinsky gave lectures on music means nothing. We're going to get into the function of music really soon, but a couple more in that regard. Duchamp said there's no art without an audience. How much are you thinking of your listener when you're writing your piece?
Ideally, none.
Yeah.
Your audience is you. Anyone who's doing something creative, who is not primarily doing it for themselves, I don't know if they're being honest with themselves.
Yeah.
Or if they are not doing it for themselves, like isn't that like the definition of a sellout?
No, you love this. Schrader, who wrote Taxi Driver, he says the role of the artist is to attempt to sell out but fail. So a lot of you laugh and people go, that's cool. But really, it can be interpreted. Talk about analysis. I've analyzed that quote. It's like, my art is so pure. I tried to sell out and I failed. That means I'm true to, and also Zappa, we did a really good piece on your YouTube channel. He said, I write music for myself. If other people like it, that's a bonus. But he knows he lives in a commercial consumer culture. And if he hits these notes and says these words, kids will buy his music, and then he can keep writing more music. So, he appears to be the most non-sellout guy, but in my opinion, he's more like this guy, Reverend Al. He said, don't sell out, sneak in. So, that's what did Cage sneak in? He sort of snuck in and people got pissed at him and they still think his 433 charted on the English pop charts 15 years ago. Now, would that
One
make
wonders why? There's always like extra musical reasons where, like, Ding Dong the Witch is Dead charted in Scotland when Margaret Thatcher died. I mean, there's all sorts of reasons.
Well, again, you brought up consumerism. Okay, so we'll get into the music deeper with all that. One more. McLuhan says everything we invent extends some humanness. Knife and fork extends our teeth. Shutter in a camera extends our eyelid. Maybe even non-tangible, say religion or philosophy, extends consciousness. What does the piano extend for you? What humanness?
I think it used to play a larger role in extending, as an extension of general musical thinking, improvisation, trying things out, seeing what fits under the fingers, playing with motifs, that sort of thing. I've moved away from doing that just because a lot of my music is now concerned, at least in part, with the sorts of the sorts of tuning systems that the piano doesn't readily provide.
I see.
I still think that it's useful for a lot of things, but if you can think about music and you can audiate it, you can hear it in your head, you don't have to go through the medium of the piano. And when I've done research on different composers, it does seem like the composers who have to have a piano to compose are limited in some way. Like they end up writing music that sounds somewhat like orchestrated piano music.
Wow, that is such a great revelation. Because if I was going to say, well, let's say the composition chart, what humanness does that extend? Because that's one of your main tools now. Whether you're using a pen or a keyboard, you're putting notes on paper. That compositional action, what a humanist. But then I thought of, you could do that one, but I'd love to hear what does tuning systems extend for you? What humanness?
I haven't really thought about it humanistically. I've thought about it more as there's been so much that's happened with 12 tones. What happens if you go beyond that? You are still limit, like the medium is always going to limit you. So if you're writing in traditional 5 lines, 4 spaces notation, and you want to write something with 13 or 14 or 15 notes to the octave, you're gonna have a really difficult time even conceptualizing it, let alone having somebody play it. Whereas if you were working in divisions of 12, right? This is why quarter tones or eighth tones are now pretty common in a lot of contemporary music. So it gives you shadings of things that you wouldn't otherwise have. You multiply the number of intervals that you can use. And Debussy said that music is the space between the notes, and I think most people think about that. I think they think about that in terms of silence, because there's a lot of like gesture and silence and stasis in Debussy's music. I think he's talking about intervals, this literal space between this note and that note, right? That's what music is, those sorts of pitch structures. And so when you have more of those available to you mathematically, the more your music is going to speak to some aspect of the human experience that we can't We don't even have words for it because it's still so uncommon in a lot of Western music. But you listen to Balinese gamelan, you listen to Harry Partch's 43 tone system. It's hard to explain the feeling that gives to the listener, especially in a live performance setting. And some of that's the nature of the instrument, some of that's the timbre. I think a lot of it has to do with the tuning system. There's something about hearing something that works, that has an internal logic that you're just not familiar with, that can be really, really powerful. And especially with quarter tones, like it gives you the access to like a very pure 11th harmonic, which is, on the one hand, very stable and very constant because it's a pure harmonic ratio, but it is right between two notes that we have on the standard piano. So we're not, it's dissonant to us, not because it's objectively dissonant, but because we're just not used to hearing it.
And we're not used to it. Dude, you're amazing, because I want to get into this space between notes coming up. It's coming up in our script here, but
I figured based on your reaction, I beat you to a quote. But
George, you taught me a great quote, because George Clinton of Parliament Funkadelic said that very thing. He says, funk is the absence of, and it's what McLuhan called it is the resonating interval. It's the space between. It's not, tactility isn't my hand touching my hand. Tactility is the space between. And you interpreted Debussy's by saying he's really talking about intervals. So he didn't say, I'm going to explain that music is the space between notes. He said that, and then you did your magical musical analysis and expanded on it. So that was really beautiful. I want to go into that through this slowly but surely. What's the function of music?
The function of music is to heighten the human experience. It's the same function any art has. We go to plays, we look at sculptures, we listen to music because we're human and we create things and we consume the things that other humans create. Yeah. Not because there's any rhyme or reason to it, right? And this is one of the things that I really like. I love academia, but there's also elements of it that I find kind of annoying, or that I think are bad trends. And one of which is this overemphasis on STEM in defunding the humanities in favor of the sciences. And don't get me wrong, like the sciences are great. Like I love that we have modern medicine and energy and like all these, like we live in a very exciting age of scientific advancement, and we should be investing in that. But what's the point of improving our quality of life, or improving the length of our lives, or improving, the ability for humans to flourish in a changing world?
Stupid.
If there's no art, right? What are we living for if we're not actually trying to create something that beautifies our world in a way that's not going to be you can't quantify on some kind of spreadsheet?
That's really good. But did you say the word STEM? STEM? Did I know?
Science, technology, engineering, and math.
And math. Okay, I didn't know what that stood for.
I believe so. It's an acronym that's often used.
Engineering and math. Yeah. And then, Thelonious Monk said music is math. So there. But before we go, I want to tell you these. I've collected, 20 functions of music from interviewing all these 1,000 interviews over 40 years. And I want you to react to them as you will. I'm just going to list them and you go, hey, wait, I'll react to that one. Mm-hmm. One was, there is no function to music. Back to Stravinsky. 2, Cage. He learned it from his, Eastern philosopher teacher, to soothe the soul and make it susceptible for divine intervention. 3, Mickey Hart, Grateful Dead drummer. Warning. You hit the log because they're coming to steal your food, so it's a system to survive better. Dylan Buston, to dance. Norman Zamchek, to keep people from going insane.
That's a good one.
Yeah, that's a good one. And
That's a good
here's
one.
David Moss, and I think similar to yours, heighten the human experience. The sound of being alive.
Now that sounds Cagean to me. If you gave me that quote out of context, I would guess Cage or one of his acolytes, right? The idea that there's no difference between music and noise, or music and just sound in general. That there's no, like, I disagree with that because I think you have to have some intentionality. There has to be some shaping on the part of a composer to say that something is composed. But certainly you can take a walk through the forest and you can choose to interpret the things you hear as musical. So
that's two things. You can see Zappa do dead air on YouTube. He just says, here's a number we used to do back 10 years ago, dead air, and he just stares at the camera for 5 seconds and doesn't say, pure Cagean. But that was good. Okay, entertainment, pleasure, nostalgia, express creativity, connection, community, ceremony, ritual, learning, stir emotion, self-awareness, healing. That's, I think, a key. It's a healing force. But here's the one I'm really curious your thoughts. To hypnotize people to be themselves.
You can hypnotize people only to do the things that they're already inclined to do. Like, you can't hypnotize someone to walk off a cliff, but you can hypnotize someone to help them, like, quit smoking or something.
Did you study Milton Erickson, or do you know about him?
No, I don't.
He's the main hypnotized person. But I think it's sort of cool that I don't know what that guy was trying to say by saying to hypnotize people to be themselves. But it is amazing. Let's go back to literature for a second. What's the greatest era of sci-fi writing? The 20s, the 40s, the 60s, the 80s? The answer is when you're a teenager. So I think it applies to music. What is the era where music really hits you is when you're a teenager, and I know we grow, but there's something. How old were you when you heard 20th century avant-garde music and you were like, hey, wait a minute. This is speaking to me more. Okay.
That was the equivalent of my parents, introduction to ABBA or Dire Straits or whatnot, which they exposed to me on long road trips, the road trip music. Like, I got really familiar with 80s pop music there.
Yeah, it's called yacht rock, right?
Yacht. I mean, well,
no. Anyways, I know what you're saying, but there's two genres you kind of mentioned, but yeah, it's 80s rock. Mm-hmm. Then another one is to appease the god, the muse, and then Varese, organizing sound, emphasizing timbre and rhythm over the traditional melody and harmony. So that was really good. In fact, let's just meld into Copland. The 4 elements of music are melody, harmony, rhythm, and tone color. In non-academic terms, what's tone color?
Tone. This is I've puzzled about this because I've had to teach this in a large, like, introduction to music class, where a lot of the kids in there were, they hoping for, in understanding music, they're like, they can sing easy A because it's music appreciation. How you describe it is what I've heard is the sound of the sound. The thing.
The sound of the sound.
Which is kind of tautological, but if you think about it, it is the thing that differentiates 2 instruments from one another. It's the thing that makes the piano and the harp, they might be playing the same note at the same time. The difference that you perceive between the two is timbre. So the only way I've been able to describe it is by introducing the other elements of music first and leaving that one, as you did, for last, because
that's the last one.
What's left over once you know what a pitch is, once you know all these other things, the main difference is going to be what's left over is timbre. And then once you know that, then you can go a little bit deeper into the harmonic series and spectral analysis and stuff like that. And what I think is really great is using these contemporary tools of technology. I can just pull up something on a browser, project it onto a screen, and make different noises into it, and you can see the overtone structure changing in real time, right, singing to going falsetto. You can see very clearly one is purer than the other, and so that gives people a visual reference to, oh, this is something that's happening within the characteristic of the sound.
Yeah.
And I found that is actually really quite helpful in not just saying, well, trust me on this, bro. It's like, this is actually something that exists, and you can use that compositionally, so then I can tell them about spectral music.
Yeah, because I don't want people to say tone color is timbre, because that's an academic term. But one person said timbre is the amount of overtones in a note, similar to the sound of the sound or different.
It's two ways of saying the same thing, right? But talking about overtones, I when you say non-academic, then you have to describe what an overtone is.
Yeah.
And you could, that's pretty easy to do, right? You can do the mathematical stuff. It's stuff that, again, you can do in music appreciation if you want to.
Yeah.
And that gives you that opens up a whole new world of technical terms that you can talk about. And there's only so many technical terms you can introduce in an environment like that. So you have to choose like which ones are going to give you the most bang for your buck. And if you teach someone about the overtone series, like the amounts of different things you can talk about, you can explore timbre in a more nuanced way. You can explore harmony in a more nuanced way. What makes something dissonant, that sort of thing.
Thomas, you can help me on this. I've been struggling how to ask this question. So if Copeland says these are the four main elements, I say, well, how do you integrate them? Do you have a favorite? How do you apply them? How do you use them? I don't know the verb I'm really asking, but it's basically, what do you do with the four elements: melody, harmony, rhythm, and tone color? Like I'm struggling to know how to ask that question. I sort of say, how do you navigate them? How do you focus? I kind of want them to say, well, I'm a melody person, but most people go, I use all four of them equally. So what? I
think there are more than four, right? I think
right. But I know there's more than four. I know there's more than four. But if you were going to ask the question, you were interviewing, Boulez, and you decided to say these four that Copeland, what verb would you say there? How do you integrate, focus? Do you have a favorite? Use?
I think a lot of genre in especially 20th century music can be defined by which one of those receives the most focus. For instance, spectral music that I mentioned is about timbre. It's about the timbre and harmony are the same thing in a lot of traditional spectral music.
Wait, spell that word, spectral. S-P-E-C-T-R-A-L. What's that word mean? Another word for that.
It refers to music that uses as its basic starting point the harmonic series, right? Or because when you look at that, that's also called the spectrum.
Right, it's rooted in the word spectrum.
Yeah, so it's rooted in this traditionally, because it took until the 70s, like you had to get computers to the point where they could input it, like could listen to a sound and give you the overtone structure, right? Because you can't do this just with your ears. You have to use computers to help you analyze sound, and then you would take that, and that would be like a chord. You would orchestrate that. That is taking timbre and kind of foregrounding it, or you could say mixing timbre and harmony together using this technology.
Well, maybe that's the verb I'm looking for. How do you mix these four elements?
Well, maybe you could say something like, which one do you think is the? I mean, you could ask people to order them, even like of these four, rank them in order of importance in your work.
Right, in your work, rank them. See, that's the other one. They're all equal. I mean, it's hard you kind of feel them out, what kind of composer they are. Because, drummers don't always go rhythm, but you would think, well, I'm a drummer. Rhythms, rank them. How do you mix them? That helps a lot. Now apply it to you. What when you're composing those four, any standouts?
Recently, I think melody has become more important. But I also think it really does depend on the nature of what you're writing.
Yeah.
When you're writing vocal music, there is melody. Like there's going to have to be melody. If you want to portray a protagonist in any way, melody is going to be an easy way to do that because you can identify with the lyricism of a certain line. But if you're looking to express a mood or an emotion or a feeling, texture is the word I would reach for more than anything else.
You mean you're adding texture to the four Copeland? That's a fifth.
I would say texture and also form are the two big things that Copeland misses out on. That I get why he limited it to those four, but
you would add texture and form.
I would, right,
as two more. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, or something that there was a analyst, I think it was a music theorist. His name was Jan LaRue. Looks like Jan, but I think it's pronounced Jan. And he wrote, I forget the name of the book, but he came up with an acronym that is like, it looks like SHMERG. It's sound, harmony, rhythm, melody. I can't visualize it in my head enough to write it down. But the G in that one, he talks about is growth, which is an odd word to use, but that's really what most people talk about form. They talk about the way that a piece changes over time.
Right.
So for LaRue, that the idea of that was one of growth, one of implicitly a piece is not going to end where it begins. So and
you're saying, did you just say that word was invented by LaRue? I missed that. Did you?
Yeah, it was a theorist named Jan LaRue.
Jean. Okay. How do you spell it?
It looks like Jan. It might be Jan, but I've always heard.
Okay, and his last name is spelled LaRue.
Yes, with a capital R.
Okay, very good. Yeah, no, that's very interesting because that's the main thing in studying McLuhan and Joyce is form and content. Mm-hmm. There's two things, So that's a really important element, that form, and you're equating it with growth. He equated growth and form, or you did?
When you read LaRue's work on this, I don't have a physical copy. I've read the book, but I don't have a physical copy of it.
Right, but he sort of emphasizes they're kind of one and the same.
Yeah, when you read his definition of growth, it's what most composers would call the form of a piece.
I got you. Yeah.
Right, but I think by saying growth, it's not the word I would always use because I think form, the word form encompasses more than just growth, right?
Yeah.
But it emphasizes the, I don't know, organicism.
Yeah.
Of some kind, or the idea that you are changed, that even if a piece returns to the beginning, that having gone through the experience of listening, you yourself are changed. Yeah,
it's good. I like that a lot. My friend says the three elements of music are T's: technique, theory, and taste. Technique, you learned how to play the piano. Theory, you knew how to analyze the structures. How does one acquire taste?
Life.
Really good. Life. Most people say exposure and experience, but I like the word life. It's a little more, but that's like gut feeling. Well, it's my gut. Life. I mean, why did you gravitate towards the music you did? Was it in contrary to Dire Straits and ABBA or in Bach, or was it something?
No, I still love Dire Straits. I
right, but I'm just saying, why did you gravitate towards that? Somehow it spoke to you, the 20th century. Why did you gravitate towards Ives? Because, can you explain it?
I've thought about this a lot, especially after having done a big project on Ives and doing so many interviews in many places. Why has he been such a standout composer
Yeah.
in I mean the history of not just American music, but music more broadly? There are different ways that I've thought about tackling this. One is that he is a composer who is simultaneously a postmodern rebel
Yeah.
and a very kind of reactionary conservative on the other hand. And these are two things that you rarely, or you never really see them coming together, right? Now, I say reactionary with a caveat because anyone who knows Ives, I mean, he was a multimillionaire, but he was really quite radical in his politics. Like, he was in favor of a maximum wage. He was in favor of putting pretty much every decision of government to a vote. He really believed in the power of the masses. He was someone who believed in an idealized version of America that didn't exist.
Would you call him a progressive lefty?
I think his politics are hard to define using today's very polarized spectrum. I think he probably would. Like, I could imagine him, if he was alive today, out there canvassing for Zoran in New York City because he cared about the welfare of people to a massive extent.
Yeah.
But he also, like, he has writings where he talks about how music had been sissified or whatnot, or stuff that he's like, stand up and use your ears like a man. He equated like masculinity with positivity.
Use the word sissified
or something similar to that. Yeah.
Right. But also is
in which he lived, right? There was this.
I don't hold that against him. But Thomas, do you think the fact that he had his job making money being an insurance guy enabled him to be more free and not dependent? Like, I've got to cater to the market so I can make a living. I can have my money taken care of and I can do whatever I want. Did that play a factor in him being a postmodern rebel?
Unquestionably.
Yeah.
Unquestionably.
So that's when they asked for Zappa, do you have any advice for up and coming musicians? He goes, yeah, get a real estate license.
And there's something to that. I mean, Ives believed that Debussy would have been, he has a quote in Essays Before Sonata, Debussy would have been a better composer if he had hoed corn for a living. And some of that I think was his projection of, like, because he wanted success in it. He moves to New York City because he wants to be the next great, like, choral composer or whatnot. And
he moved there to do that.
In part, he was.
I see what you're saying. Yeah.
I mean, he roomed with a bunch of Yale grads at a place called Poverty Flat, which moved around a bunch, and it was this. They weren't really that poor, but it was a whole bunch of Yaleys who were there, and part of the reason I was thinking about this is because I have been teaching a class this semester on forms of musical postmodernism, and of course, Ives is one of the greats, using different quotations and irony and stuff that's layered on top of itself. But he also has this idea of, we need to return music to some kind of older primal masculine state.
Yeah.
And these two things are often in total contradiction to one another, because the composers who say we have to go back to the past and start over, again, I say reactionary, they're not politically reactionary. That's how we got on this tangent. But they're reactionary in the sense that, we've lost something in the past and we need to return to it. So that can be Ives, it could be Harry Partch, who basically reinvented the entire history of music. Dude, I love his Genesis of a Music. It's a great read.
I love Harry Partch. I go on the boardwalk in Venice for 45 years and just encounter some of the most amazing musicians. I'm incredible. And I've done big projects on it. And one day I encountered a guy playing a Harry Partch instrument, and it was like a thumb piano with the things were like this big. And he's like hitting this. I'm like, what the, and I mean, to me, Harry Partch is, there'd be no Captain Beefheart or Tom Waits without Harry Partch. And, he's way beyond that as well. And the fact that he became a hobo and burned all his music, again, talk about post. He's a postmodern. He's a pomo decon. He deconstructed postmodernism. So I love that you drop all these names because they appeal to me, Harry Parch, and Ives, especially your knowledge of Ives. But I want to stay on that word taste for a second, Thomas, because there's something, that you gravitated towards. They say people think with their stomachs now. So there's something about taste. That word taste is kind of amazing. You said life. A lot of people say exposure, experience. Here's the McLuhan quote with the word taste in it that I would love for you to comment on. Song is slowed down speech. The reason cultures have different musical taste is ultimately connected to language difference. Any comment?
There is strong evidence to suggest that the rhythmic patterns of certain folk musics is tied into the stress patterns of the languages themselves.
Yeah.
Very, very strong evidence to suggest. I mean, this is something I came across most recently in a big video I did on the Czech composer Bedřich Smetana. And Czech has a very consistent first syllable emphasis. And occasionally there are accent markings that elongate a syllable without making it stressed, which is totally foreign to me. And so usually those end up with the stress when us English speakers try to pronounce Czech. So there is definitely something to that. And the idea that something is slowed down speech is, I mean, that seems so obviously true. It hardly requires noting. I mean, and I think of the adaptation of stage plays into operas, right? You have to cut out a lot in order to get the opera on the stage, because to sing something and to get that, to communicate that, you have to go slower. And then the music is there, the instrumental music is there to fill in the gaps of action on the stage, to comment upon what's happening on the stage. So as a practical matter, McLuhan's spot on in both those cases.
Dude, that's amazing. Most people discount the first part. Song isn't slow down speech. They just discount it. The second part, they go, well, it could be, but you really psychoanalyze that bit. I got to tell you my great Czech joke I got from Miroslav Vitus, the first bass player for Weather Report, who was a Czech. He says, they call me Bounce because I'm one bad Czech. But I have,
that's so bad it's good.
Yeah, I have Czech blood, so I love you bringing that up. Okay, here's the big one. What's more fundamental, language or music?
Language.
Wow.
If music is a type of language, then language is the broader category, which we can understand music.
Tell me an instrumental that makes you laugh.
Oh, I taught this one really recently, and I got a great response. I always love this piece. It's Cat o' Nine Tails by John Zorn. It is the only string quartet I know with a whipping scene. He because the subtitle of it is Tex Avery conducts the Marquis de Sade, or directs the Marquis de Sade. It is a hilariously violent and cartoonish piece that consists of hundreds of small snippets of like Looney Tunes. Like, he was inspired by Carl Stallings' work on the Looney Tunes boards, and it's just this constant array of like, you never know what's going to come up next, and so it's a rollicking, roughly 10-minute piece. Definitely worth your while. All the Zorn string quartets are crazy, but that's my personal favorite.
Dude, that was a great example of two things. When Zorn released Carl Stalling music, like, first of all, we saw Bugs Bunny Superstar, the first documentary, and they go, here's a picture of the band that played the music, and we're like, what? No one could even think, I mean, and growing up watching Warner Brothers cartoons, that there was an orchestra, because you couldn't separate. It was too integrated, the music and the cartoon. So then I would tell people, do you ever watch Bugs Bunny with your eyes shut? They're like, yeah, because you don't really hear the music as music. And it is an amazing, Carl Stalling and the other guy, whatever his name was.
Milt Franklin.
Well, there's several
Yeah.
others. Anyways, yeah, there's 3 or 4.
Mm-hmm.
But the other one is we just hired Greg Cohen for a gig. He lives in Venice, and he played on 33 John Zorn albums. It's like, whoa, that's a pretty good resume. I mean, besides playing with everybody else in the world, from Ornette Coleman to Randy Newman. Okay, so
playing
now
on simply one John Zorn track is probably going to give you enough genre experience to do anything you want.
Though John Zorn is the typical snooty old time Zappa fan, where he goes, well, I like his first 3 albums. It's like the guy made 60 albums in 30 years. If you leave out one of Frank's albums, you're not, it's not fair. If you say, well, I've listened to, the first 3 and that's it, you're not really, you're missing out. So it's all right. He can miss out. I don't care.
Yeah. Well, I would get it if he said, oh, I've listened to a bunch, but these are my favorites. Like, I don't know. I have my favorite Talking Heads albums for sure, but
right.
I wouldn't tell you that, I stopped listening after their live. I think their live albums are the best, so I don't listen to this. Like, I do think their live albums are their best, but I'm not going to crap on their first album or whatever.
No, that's like a guy at a party once says, I'm into early BTO, like Bachman Turner Overdrive. It's like early. Okay. So now we're going to go into the silence thing, because you kind of brought it up. How do you know when to integrate silence and not playing? Miles said, I think Miles got that from Debussy. Miles said that it's the space between the notes. George Clinton said funk is the absence of, and Thelonious Monk said silence is the loudest sound in the universe. So there's some more quotes I want to give you on silence to get you going, but let's start there. How do you know? What guides you to incorporate silence in a piece and not play?
There are many reasons that I think of music as a language, and this is one of them. It's not just the grammatical structure of a certain line. It's a larger question about if you're going to make a speech, right? Or what I'm doing now. There are pauses, right? For dramatic effect, to make sure that people can catch up and listen. If I'm just constantly spurting out a stream of words, it could be the exact same words, but it won't have the same effect. And so when you think about form, you think about large structure, you think about rhetoric, what are the most important spots that you really want to make sure that are emphasized, and how do you emphasize those? Do you speed up? Do you get louder, or do you frame them with silence? Right, it is a tool in the toolbox that heightens the drama of that which surrounds them. And I think this is especially true for music that exists on the very edge of silence. There's some Cage that does this, obviously, but Webern does this sometimes. But a composer who's alive today that does this quite a bit is a fellow named Evan Johnson, and he works a little bit in this kind of new complexity, very dense looking scores. But the music itself exists on this very, the very edge of what's really audible or what's really playable or what actually makes a sound, right? He might have like a flute piece where there's a lot of intricacies of how you're blowing through it, and just occasionally you might hear little wisps of sound, and then encourages the listener to listen closer in. Is that a sound? Is it not a sound? Is this part of it or not? And I think that's a really interesting way that I don't write music that's really like his at all, but I really respect how he's been able to incorporate silence in a way that really brings the listener in and draws the listener in a way that you can tell is definitely related to the concept, the philosophical concept of 433. But like I said earlier, it's like Cage said, oh, here's a possibility. And I think composers like Johnson are exploring those islands that got mapped out by those avant-garde cartographers. And so when I listened to those pieces, I learned something from the rhetorical use of silence in that way. Does this piece benefit from having a pause here? Does this pause really mean something? Takamitsu, the great self-taught Japanese composer, one of the great orchestrators of all time. There's a concept in Japanese art called ma, which is, you might think of it as like a pregnant silence or something. It's a silence that actually has some kind of structure and meaning, where it's a silence, but it's full of energy or full of life. It's a very hard term to translate. And when you listen to his music as well, the gestures and the flowing, it's like post Debussy, just absolutely lush. And then there are pauses, and the pauses are invariably the exact right amount of time. So it's not just that you have pauses, it's that you really think through how they work in the rhetoric of a piece. And there's so many fantastic examples from 20th and 21st century music that expand on fundamentally Cagean principles in the subject.
Really well done, Thomas. So a couple quotes. Let's start with A Wee Wee, who's, I think he is Japanese, the artist.
I believe he's Chinese.
Oh, he's Chinese. Thank you.
Yeah, he's gotten in some trouble from the government over there.
I should write that. Okay. He said, "For me, silence is music."
It's not for me. Like the idea that silence is a part of music.
It's a part.
It's like I mentioned earlier, like it is used in so many great ways in the rhetoric of music by many fantastic composers. And I try to learn from these and try to model them and question, why does this work here? And so that I can apply those principles to my own thinking. But silence in and of itself, I think that goes a little bit too far. I respectfully disagree with that extreme Cagean view.
Here's Roscoe Mitchell, from Art Ensemble of Chicago Jazz. Silence is perfect.
Well, is there such a thing as silence? That's another question.
Oh my God, you have ESP. That is amazing, because you know what the next question is?
What
they asked McLuhan. Will there ever be silence?
Well, Cage's point was that, again, going back to 433, the point of that is that there really isn't. Right?
There isn't.
Because people misunderstand that piece as the silent piece. And, maybe dead air is, it's close. I mean, there's still going to be some kind of noise. But 433 is about listening intently to the sounds of your environment as intently as you would a Beethoven sonata or whatever, or a string quartet that's on stage.
Whatever, right? Because that's what he's saying. He's saying, listen closely to your environment. And because he couldn't hear silence, but the way, McLuhan and Cage were pals, and they were talked and exchanged letters. And when McLuhan was asked that, will there ever be silence? He says, things don't exist on their own. They exist in relationship. So if me and you, we're in Venice, California, and let's go to the desert and hear silence. We drive for 45 minutes in a car. Then we get out of the car and walk for 15 minutes. Then we sit on a rock. I swear me and you could go, I'm hearing silence. But it's because the relationship is we heard car noise for 45 minutes. Then we heard our feet on the sand for 15 minutes. And then there were no birds in the area or anything. So we swear we were hearing silence. But we weren't. So he's saying it's relationship that exists. Will there ever be silence? Yeah. Yes. Because when I ride my bike in the morning at 6 a.m., I swear it's silent. There's no noise on my bike, no car noise. I go, wow. But it isn't. But, again, okay, here's two more silent quotes. Now we got five more minutes. Can you go longer, or do you want to? We could just do a part two. How much longer could you go if you wanted to go?
As long as you need. I mean, I have nothing else on my schedule. I mean, eventually I got to have dinner and.
Okay, no, let's go. Let's go another 10 or 15, and then
sure.
let's plan a part 2 like 6 months down the line, because we didn't even really get into the music questions, and you're beyond brilliant on this. Okay, here's another silence quote. Bob Dylan. Experience teaches that silence terrifies the most.
I keep thinking about what you just talked about. You swear it's silent on your bike, but if you ever go into a purely anechoic chamber,
Right.
these small rooms where there's a bunch of fuzz around you to dampen the sound, you hear the blood rushing through your arteries and your veins.
And the central nervous system. You hear 2 things.
Yeah,
but again, that's the environment of the relationship of your environment.
Yeah. So even in those situations, like, you're still hearing, there is still something to be perceived instead of silence. If you have the capability of listening, obviously. I mean, that's the example that I would think of. I mean, could you say the Bob Dylan quote again?
Experience teaches that silence terrifies the most.
Terrifies. Well, yeah, because it's scary when you hear your central nervous system. Like, no one's supposed to hear that. It is inherently it's wrong. Like, I don't mean that like some kind of like moral sense. It's like, this is a technology that's enabling us to hear something that, like, we really shouldn't. Like, we're not designed to be hearing this. We're literally designed to filter these noises out. Like the sound of the blood rushing through your ears is something you're always hearing, but you're just tuning it out. But silence, I mean, on a sociological level, that which you cannot speak is that which is most terrifying.
Yeah.
So I don't know what his quote was, probably more sociological than knowing what he was probably talking about, but
yeah,
who knows?
But Dylan's a great one who said, "Are you a poet?" And he goes, "No, I'm a trapeze artist." Okay, so here's one more silence quote, Thomas Carlyle. And you brought up this word earlier. I was, man, you're anticipating. Speech is of time, silence is of eternity.
Well, yeah, I mean, the heat death of the universe at some point. No one knows exactly, how the universe would end if left to its own devices. But the idea that there would eventually be so much expansion of the universe that there is eventually nothing and atoms are all scattered as far apart across spaces as possible if gravity breaks down or whatnot. Right? These are, far future, very, very speculative things that theoretical physicists talk about in books when they want to make some extra money on the side. But there is the idea that if you're not speaking, there is at least relative silence. That making intentional noise as humans is the exception rather than the rule. And if it's the exception rather than the rule, then it's precious and should be protected.
Yeah. That's why I sort of always love to return to monks. Music is math. Silence is the loudest sound in the universe because it's got that twist. Mm-hmm. Then my favorite is, my friend said, Thelonious Monk heard all the same notes Charlie Parker heard, but only decided to play some of them. To me, that is like the discerning master, saying, okay, I can hear all that, but I'm only going to play some of these,
Well, that's another example. This is from the jazz world, but that relates to the composers I mentioned earlier. That the use of silence as a rhetorical tool of holding back a little bit, not playing. Well, it's like jazz is the notes you don't play or whatnot. That's definitely in that mix.
Yeah, but jazzy's. I'm heavily into jazz and funk and rock and everything. But everybody overplays. It's like, dude, slow down. Play less notes. They don't know how to play less notes. It's like now it's a race for no. And I love Art Tatum and Oscar Peterson, but it's like, okay, can you play? Okay, so that goes right along with that. We'll tackle this one maybe for the end, Thomas. Frank Zappa says it's unnatural to play in 4/4. because you don't speak in 4/4 time. The question is, why is 4/4 time the most commonly used time signature in Western music?
That's a really good question, because if you go back to the history of notation, what we think of as common time, which is 4/4 or 2/2 or whatnot, that's represented by what looks to us to be a C, and so we think that C is for common time. That C is not a C; it's a broken circle, and that circle represented a perfect time, which was divided into threes because of the relationship between the perfection of the number 3 of the Holy Trinity and the perfection of music. And this is the medieval view on these things. How 4 became more common is a really great question that I think you would have to ask someone who's much more into understanding medieval and especially late medieval music to be able to figure out. Because certainly we still use there is still music in 3, but 4/4 for some reason. Maybe because when we started to have, this is just me speculating, I could be totally wrong. If you have a time signature instead of just some symbol, and you have a denominator that refers to the size of the note, having the same number twice is kind of nice, you know. 4/4 or 2/2, or that just looks nicer than 3/4 or 6/8 or whatnot. But no, that'd be an interesting question to think about, like the history of theory and the history of the relationship between, especially the church and music, because is there some kind of relationship between the rise of 4/4 and the relative secularization of music when you get past the church's domination of it? I don't know. That's a very fascinating question.
It's really good, Thomas. No one's ever delved into it in this angle, and I appreciate that, because when was a guesstimate where the history of notation? When did notation start approximately? Is it hard to pinpoint, or?
Well, it's not the easiest thing in the world to pinpoint, just because there aren't that many. Oh my gosh. we have cat. A cat has spotted a fly on the wall. Oh, this is good. Ruth is going at it. All right. There's one of the classic texts on notation is the Notation of Medieval Music by I forget his nationality. I think it was either German or Swiss or something. I mean, it looks like Willy Apple, but Willy Appel, Williapel. And his book starts around, I think, 900 or so.
Yeah.
But there's one assumes that there was a rich history of notation that goes back even before then. We just don't have. We can only go on what has survived to the present day. Notation used to be, at least, and this is still the case in a lot of non-Western musics, notation is an aid to memory. So the earliest forms of notation are, there's no lines, there's no staves, there's no clefs, there's just like a bunch of jottings above some kind of sacred text that would be sung. You would learn it by ear, and then, oh, does it go up here or go down here? Oh, I'm just gonna, this is just like a note to oneself.
Yeah.
And eventually, at some point, that people realized that if you systematized it a little bit more, you could then write down something, send it to the next abbey over, and you wouldn't have to send some monk over to teach the guys over there by rote. And that's how you start to get a more portable system of music notation that ends up putting those same little designs onto staves, and you start to have the emergence of actual music theory. The Guidonian hand and whatnot emerges out of the need to be able to look at something on a page and understand enough about it to be able to sing it, to be able to replicate it on some level. Something that Appel wrote, one of the things that he continually mentions in this book, which is, again, was one of the classic books on medieval notation, is he's constantly complaining about how we don't really have any idea how this stuff sounded, because there's no There's no indication that there was any set pitch, any set tempo, any set rhythm. It's just a series of designs on a page at some point. And I think that's a very modernist view of there is one way to play this. There is one pure way that we're going to perform this music. And I just got to think that if they were so loosey-goosey with their notation, there must have been a wider range of acceptable performance practices. Like, is there even one way that medieval music was performed? Probably not. There are probably a lot of different ways.
It's really good, Thomas. Frank Zappa would compose because he liked how it looked, black ink on white paper, to the point where his buddy Captain Beefheart said, music is just black ants crawling on white paper. But here, I'm going to read you a couple of these thoughts on this. Why is 4/4 the most commonly used time signature in Western music? Besides being intuitive and easy, it might be because it's in sync with walking or marching. Now, one guy said, well, we have 2 hands and we have 2 feet. So that kind of might be. The other people say, because it's in sync with our heartbeat rhythm. What time signature do you think our heartbeat rhythm is in?
I think kind of a 2/2 with a very like boom. I think that was like an upbeat to the downbeat, like boom, that sort of thing. I don't know. I don't really buy either of those two things that you just said, just because you would expect if those things, which are human universals, walking and having, most of us have 2 hands and 2 feet. You'd expect that would be a musical universal as well. But there are plenty of examples of non-Western music, or even forms of traditional, like Eastern European music, that have all these sort of additive rhythms and are far beyond 4/4. Even traditional English folk melodies, they'll add like half a beats or quarter beats or a third of a beat here and there. And that gave, I know Percy Grainger, when he was traipsing around and writing all these things down, he was very precise. And like, if someone added an 8th beat here, it would be, you'd have a silent measure of like 1/8 and then would continue on. So no, I just don't buy that it's something innate about humans. I think there has to be some question of the history of notation and the history of specifically like Western concepts of notation, rather than, oh, it's just human universals. Like, anyway, I played Balinese gamelan in college. There is no 4/4 about that in the slightest, right? It's totally a foreign concept.
Well, some people say our heartbeats in 5/8 time, or 3/4, 3/4, or 6/8. But here's one last thing. Captain Beefheart said he liked to vary from what he called the mama heartbeat. He said the same old 4/4 rhythm is related to fascism. It is so fixative, so hypnotic, so synthesized that it's dangerous to the heart. It's faster than the heart. Disco is dangerous. He wanted non-hypnotic music to break up the canatonic state. So it's interesting, if you listen to Captain Beefheart's music, his drummer is definitely playing non-traditional rock. He sort of helped change rock drumming, drumbo. And any thoughts on that it is hypnotic and fixative? Any thoughts on Beefheart's words?
When I think of hypnotic music, I don't think of 4/4. I think of stuff that exists in a more complicated relationship to time. I think of Terry Riley's In C.
Right. I was just going to say,
there's probably 1 or 2 of those fragments on the page that's in 4/4 or whatnot. But the effect of listening to any of that is just this total wash of sound and a slow evolution of one thing into the next. And if I'm going to be charitable with the Beefheart quote, you could say, well, he's talking about how this is so much of the standard and the default, especially in the rock world that he was critiquing. I think it's a little bit much to say it's fascist. But
A
you know,
little bit, yeah.
but you could say that you could say that it is like kind of it's so ubiquitous that it's the basic structure that you can then play with, right? It is an expectation to hear something in 4/4 that when you
Yeah.
syncopate something, when you change the tempo, when you change that basic structure, you are playing with people's conceptions of time and their expectations of time. And there
Yeah.
are plenty of ways to do that that aren't what he did necessarily, but are related to the same underlying principle of questioning the supremacy of this one way of orientating ourselves around time. But there's nothing about it that says hypnotism to me.
Yeah. It's really good because Captain Beefheart Don was also a fan of Steve Reich. You know, he liked to put on that Reich music when he was making Troutmaster Replica, which has all these weird time signatures. And Bertolt Brecht says, I don't want art that puts me in a trance. I want art that activates me. It's like, well, dude, you know, if your art puts you in a trance, it might lead to you being activated. So, you know, it's like Terry Riley, amazing, you know, in C and in Gamelis, what you played, that's like trance music. And my favorite was Richard Feynman brought the tuba throat singers over to Zappa's house, and these guys, they sing about three things: their boots, snow, and horses. But when you listen to their music, it's transcendental and it will put you in a trance, you know, that tuba throat singing. So it's really been a pleasure, Thomas. You know, I rarely have people, I interview a lot of jazz and rock, and, you know, I interview some classical music people, but they don't know as deep as you do how to talk about music analysis in layperson's terms. You haven't talked over my head, you know, and that's what I like. You really brought it down. You're a good teacher in a lot of ways, and I learned a lot. And I think some of these other aspects of music that I would like to get into in part two, and education and just art and books in general, we could tackle in maybe 4, 5, 6 months down the road, you know, and do another part if you're interested. I really appreciate it.
Sure, this was a great conversation. I enjoyed it likewise, and you threw a lot of quotes at me, and I feel like we kind of got somewhere, and it is really nice to hear that you thought that I was able to explain these things in non-technical terms, because that has been,
yeah,
you know, that's part of the reason that I do what I do online, is that classical music especially is so riven with people who have technical expertise or who are just sort of snobby about it.
yeah,
And I don't think that is an inherent feature of this kind of music. I think there is a much broader audience for classical music, you know, small c, right? It goes all, you know, from medieval music to
yeah.
avant-garde stuff. I think there's a much larger audience for that than people who currently listen to it. And so that's part of my job. Like, if I'm going to be a composer, like, I want to curate it. I want to make sure that I have an audience, right? I'm writing for myself, but like, I care about if we don't have an audience, then the art dies, right? It, you know, if a tree falls in the forest, doesn't make a sound. Well, you make a sculpture, no one comes to the art gallery. Is it really a sculpture, right? That's the corollary of that.
No, it's all about
Yeah.
commonality of community sharing something, some commonality. That's what really music is, community. And Moon Zappa wrote an article. She wrote a book recently, and she wrote an article in Newsweek magazine. She says, I was in the valley and I saw some graffiti and it said, not all cults are bad. Now, you know, cults are demonized mainly. I mean, there's the classical music cult. There's the Zappa fan cult, you know, and I'm in the Joyce and the McLuhan cult. But then I researched it more, and, you know, culture, etymologically, cult comes from culture, which is growth. Back to your word, growth. That, you know, you use fertilizer and shit to make things grow. And then I found the Mallarmé quote that pretty much said music is a cult.
It
Which
can be, and it's
yeah,
important to get your head out of the sand sometimes and put
yeah,
yourself in larger context. And I have a lot of music books, but I also I'm interested in the world beyond it because, in part, if I'm going to make stuff that's accessible and educational, if I'm going to present a good lecturing class, I'm going to
yeah,
film fin- film a lecture and do a YouTube version of that. I have to be able to make it relevant to something that's large. I have to be able to compare it to other things. I have to be able to make
yeah,
good analogies. I have to make sure that my metaphorical language makes sense to where people are and meet people where they're at.
yeah,
And so it's important that, as much as you are in the cult of something, you can never get so far into it that you actually start to take offense if someone disagrees with the
yeah,
cult. And that's when I see that in classical music, that's what I think of as snobbishness of like, oh well, why did you say this? It's like, lighten up. I try to be funny. I put in internet memes. I try to
yeah,
like I'm I'm not I don't know whether I'm a millennial or Gen Z. I'm kind of on the cusp of that, but like
yeah,
I'm trying to make this stuff that's actually accessible. And if you think that classical music education needs to be boring and stuffy and read all these books and whatnot, or you have to have an advanced degree, well, screw that. I don't believe that at all. If you believe
yeah.
that, then get out and get make room for someone who's going to make it a little bit more accessible to anyone who wants to learn about it.
Yeah, my friend says when you're laughing, you're learning. The humor thing was really important. And George Clinton put out a book, and I was at his book signing. And I said, "What kind of music do you like?" And he goes, "The kind of music that pisses me off, so I can figure out why does this music piss me off? Like, how could music do any harm? Like, we have these snooty taste things, and we're like, oh, I don't like that. And guilty pleasures, like, oh my God, I like, the Shags or something, and people are like, that's the worst music of the world. But my friend once said, he says, well, I don't know a lot about music. I don't know if that's good or bad. I goes, what do you mean? You've heard music your whole life. You don't have to know about it in intellectualizing it. It's just what's your hunch. Do you gravitate towards it, or is it confuse you, or whatever? That's what life is. Like, back to your word life. How do you acquire taste through life?
Yeah, it's experience, and that,
Yeah,
that goes for anything. That goes for the best way to learn is by doing, right? When I
yeah,
started the YouTube stuff, it was terrible. I had no right to be doing any of this. Like I knew nothing about anything, right? But then you do it and you get better by doing it, and you look back and it helps you develop your sense of being able to see what you do and your work from kind of a third party perspective, and that's ultimately the best way to be as an artist, right? You
yeah,
have to do it for yourself, but also be able to put yourself in an objective position to say, okay, well, I think this section needs to be longer, or you're not
yeah,
explaining this term properly. Maybe
yeah,
rework that. So going back to growth, it is a constant. Right? We're always getting better, always improving, right? And I think it's
yeah.
Pablo Casals, the great cellist. Someone once asked him, he was in his 90s, like, why are you practicing? He goes, well, I think I'm getting better. That's true
Yeah,
for everybody.
that's Sonny Rollins. He keeps playing after the gig's done, and his band members go, "Dude, we're done." And he goes, "I'm still trying to work things out." He's still playing in the dressing room.
Mhm.
When I brought up a musician brought up the Cassell quote, said, "Why are you still practicing?" Thomas, what a pleasure. I'm going to hit the end broadcast button now, and I hope this never ends. Thank you so much. Really a delight, and I really appreciate your time and energy.
Well, thank you, and thank you for inviting me. And I'm looking forward to the round two in a
All
little
right.
while.
All right. Thanks again. All right.
All
See
right,
ya.
take care.